On Sunday the 24th of September, just last month, a 32-year-old photographer named Chelsea Grimm set off on a solo trip across the country for a wedding in Connecticut, but unfortunately, she would never arrive. She was eventually reported missing by her parents, who noticed that they hadn't heard from their daughter for over a week, and so they started to become concerned. The police were immediately sent out to look for the missing young woman, and after just a day of searching, they stumbled upon her car, abandoned in Arizona. After examining the locked vehicle, they couldn't find any signs of a struggle, so it was initially assumed that Chelsea had decided to camp out somewhere and simply left her car unattended. However, after almost 3 weeks, the police are still unable to locate her, which has led many to wonder, could Chelsea Grimm be the next victim to add to the long list of young people going missing in Arizona? Chelsea Grimm was born in 1991 to her parents Stephen and Janet Grimm. She grew up in a town called Heron, where she attended the rather controversial Monarch High School in Montana. Little was known about her time here, but since graduating in 2009, the school eventually closed down due to financial controversy that surrounded the owners. I won't go into too much detail now, but since 2017, many parents have attempted to sue the school for malpractice and for their apparent misuse of school funds. Anyway, after graduating, Chelsea eventually decided to pursue a career in photography, with the honourable goal of giving a voice to those in society who did not have one. But as the young woman moved into her early 30s, this successful career would soon take a backseat to her ever-increasing relationship difficulties, with ex-boyfriends seeming to have a direct impact on her state of mental health. However, Chelsea did not let this stop her from being an independent and extremely strong woman who was very capable of looking after herself. But it would be this personality trait in particular which would appear to eventually lead to her sudden disappearance. On Sunday the 24th of September, the 32-year-old woman was preparing for her flight to Connecticut from her home in San Diego, California. However, after being told by the airline that she would be unable to take her pet bearded dragon with her on the plane, she apparently was left devastated and therefore refused to fly. But determined to see her friend get married, she decided to embark on a 2,800-mile drive across the country, all so she could be with her beloved pet Roxy. She informed her parents that day, however they were concerned for her well-being, given that she would be travelling alone. But Chelsea assured them that she would be fine, and that if she was to get in any trouble along the way, she would call them immediately. So after quickly planning the route she would take, Chelsea Grimm soon set off for Arizona, which would be her first stop. But unfortunately, this first stop would likely be her last, as just 3 days later, she would suddenly stop responding to her messages. On Wednesday the 4th of October, Stephen and Janet Grimm reached their boiling point, as they had now been unable to contact their daughter for over a week. So seriously worried about Chelsea's safety, they felt they had no other option than to call the Phoenix police and report the young woman as missing. During the trip, Chelsea had stated that she would be passing through a few areas where there would be poor signal, so at first her parents weren't too concerned. But after the days kept ticking by with no sign of their daughter, they realised that something terrible may have happened to her. Well, the police agreed, and immediately sent officers over to her last known whereabouts to see if they could confirm if she was safe and alive. But what they would soon find was anything but reassuring for the Grimm family. On Thursday the 5th of October, the Phoenix police were sent out to a forest in Arizona, as they had received a tip from a local that they saw the young woman a week prior on the 28th of September. The officers rushed over to the area and started conducting their searches, but with the landscape being so dense, it was expected they wouldn't have any luck until at least a few days. But somehow, against the odds, a hunter would soon find her abandoned vehicle on a Forest Service road near Ashford in the Kaibab National Forest. After receiving this tip, the police officers headed straight over to the abandoned white Ford Escape, which appeared to have 2 flat tyres. Given this major discovery, it was assumed that Chelsea was likely nearby somewhere and looking for help, so the group of officers then set off in different directions to try and locate the missing woman. But unfortunately, after searching the Kaibab National Forest for several days, they were still unable to locate her, and the case eventually started to turn cold. Evidence was becoming stagnant with no more sightings or leads to work from, but this all suddenly changed when an officer from the Coconino County Sheriff's Department would unexpectedly come forward with some incredibly important evidence. On Monday the 9th of October, the officer named Jim Driscoll provided some interesting camera footage of a conversation he had recently had with Chelsea while she was sitting in her car, around a week before her missing person report was filed. Sheriff Driscoll had crossed paths with the young photographer after responding to a call about a woman who was acting suspicious by a cemetery in Williams, Arizona. Chelsea reportedly told the officer that she had suddenly become emotional while working on a photo project concerning missing soldiers, adding that she planned to sleep in her vehicle that night. She was quoted as saying, "I was just doing a photo shoot of the lost soldiers and got a little emotional, so I was crying before I got back on the road." According to Sheriff Driscoll, he had spoken to her during the middle of the night on the 27th of September. Apparently, she had also recently cancelled her lunch plans with a friend she was supposed to meet the next day, and then later that very same day is when another witness saw her at the Seligman Hotel in Arizona. The Sheriff's Department also stated that they were told by one individual that she seemed confused while staying at this hotel, as she was trying to exchange euros as opposed to US currency. At first, this was thought to be her last known whereabouts. However, it wasn't long until the police uncovered another official sighting of Chelsea, which was 2 days later, on the 30th of September. She was spotted by a local woodcutter who reported seeing Chelsea while she was camping overnight in her SUV in Ashfork, Arizona. According to the witness, he talked to her at around 12 p.m. and said she was fine, claiming she was just taking photos and didn't need any help. So with this new testimony, the police headed out to Ashfork to conduct another search for the young woman, with hopes relatively high that they would find her camping out in a nearby forest. But unfortunately, after 2 weeks of searching this location, as well as other surrounding areas, the police are still yet to find the missing young woman, which leaves this case unsolved for now. But with the extensive knowledge that is available, what kind of conclusions can we actually draw here? Was this just another simple case of a mentally unstable woman who accidentally fell victim to the elements? Or should we be looking into a potential suspect behind Chelsea's mysterious disappearance? The fact is, there are arguments for both sides, but as always, with the strange circumstances surrounding this case, I feel it's imperative we continue to spread awareness and work together to solve this mystery. So with that, let's get into some of the potential theories. Now, before you even look into the evidence, the idea of a young woman travelling alone across the country simply doesn't sound like the safest decision. With the amount of evil lurking in this world, it's unfortunate to say that if a potential suspect did come across Chelsea while she was alone in Arizona, it is very possible that they could have used this as an opportunity to take advantage of her. But without a body to prove or disprove this theory, there isn't too much we can really say for now. We know her car suffered 2 flat tyres, which would have likely caused her to seek out help. However, we do not know what caused these flat tyres, whether it was an intentional act by somebody else or not. But even if this was just a simple accident, Chelsea could have decided to wander off into the forest to set up camp, and then after being discovered alone in her tent, a potential suspect could have acted. If this was the case, her body would have likely been discarded somewhere, or even buried in a nondescript location in the woods to keep the crime a secret. This would certainly explain why the police are still unable to locate her body after all this time. But before we delve too deep into this unproven theory, we have to remain open-minded to other potential explanations for her strange disappearance. But who else would have had a reason to hurt Chelsea Grimm, other than a random passerby with sick intentions? Well, a logical place to start would be to look at her ex-boyfriend, who she had seemed to suffer a large amount of trauma from. We do not know any real specifics about her past relationships except for her most recent breakup, which was with a man named Philip John Brenner, otherwise known as PJ. According to her friends, PJ was an abusive person both mentally and physically, which had caused Chelsea to eventually end the relationship not too long before her disappearance. But what real evidence do we have that can actually link PJ to Williams, Arizona, where she was last seen? Well, although we do not know his exact whereabouts at the time, we do know that the bearded dragon that Chelsea was travelling with was originally PJ's pet. Now, I'm not saying he would have committed the heinous act of murder over a stolen bearded dragon, but as this animal did originally belong to PJ, he could have had it microchipped with GPS capabilities. So perhaps this could provide an explanation as to how he would have even known where Chelsea was. But this isn't the only damning evidence against PJ, as Chelsea's parents would later discourage the public from interacting with a GoFundMe page set up by the man himself for his ex-girlfriend's disappearance, stating that his intent was for personal gain, not for helping the family or the search efforts. This opinion can also be backed up by his apparent meth addiction, which may have been his reason for starting the GoFundMe in the first place as a way to get money to feed his addiction. Now, once again, there is no concrete evidence for these facts, as I can only go off the word of mouth of Chelsea's friends and family, but these details certainly paint a rather bleak picture and could certainly explain why Chelsea would have made such an irrational decision to drive across the country so abruptly. It also helps explain why she was so determined to take the bearded dragon with her on her trip, as maybe she was worried her ex-boyfriend would steal it back while she was away. But for argument's sake, if Chelsea's ex-boyfriend isn't to blame for her disappearance, could she have caused this herself? Well, to answer this question, a point I feel is very necessary to go back to is that she was spotted crying in her car on the 27th of September, and had clearly been partaking in recreational substance use. The police officer who spoke to her could tell she was in distress, but this was chalked up as a reaction to the area she was in. At the time, Chelsea was taking photographs of a cemetery for fallen soldiers, so it made sense that she would be emotional. But the fact that a passerby was so concerned about her activity that they called the police tells me that there may be more to this story. Could she have been hysterically crying and causing a scene? Again, you could argue this would have been normal behaviour of somebody sitting by a gravesite, but I think you could also make the argument that Chelsea was in some kind of emotional distress that was much deeper. Her decisions leading up to her disappearance were certainly questionable at best, and we know she had been suffering with mental health issues for a while. Her parents even stated that in the 2 days leading up to her spontaneous road trip, she was acting out of the ordinary. Perhaps she was dealing with something at the time and just wanted to get away on her own and be one with nature. But this wasn't her only strange activity, as during her trip, a witness would also claim she was acting strange at a hotel, as she was trying to pay with euros as opposed to US currency. I suppose you could argue this was a simple mistake, but the fact this witness thought it was so odd that they felt it was necessary to tell the police this detail tells me that she may have seemed out of her right mind at the time. Also, we know her ex-boyfriend was a substance abuser, so it's very possible she struggled with a similar addiction. So is it possible she could have been using at the time of her disappearance? Well, if this was the case, it would be easy to imagine she may have wandered off into the woods or the desert and gotten lost, only to pass away due to the elements. Or even maybe this was an intentional act, as she simply couldn't bear to continue struggling through life. But I'll choose not to speak too much on this, as I can neither confirm or deny any of these details, with the case still being extremely fresh. But either way, hopefully the police will be able to release some new evidence soon, so we can find out what really happened to Chelsea Grimm that day, and bring closure to her family. Anyway, with that, I think I'll leave this video here. But if you have any theories of your own which may explain Chelsea's strange disappearance, please leave a comment down below so we can try and get to the bottom of this mystery. But just before I end the video, I wanted to quickly mention that this is far from the only case I have covered on this channel that has involved the Arizona desert or road trips which have ended in tragedy. So if you find these types of stories interesting, feel free to check out the videos on screen now, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any updates on these cases.